I've been in many different gaming communities over the years, and fan creations have been something that have been present in all of them. Undertale is not only no different, but is maybe the most creatively rich and passionate fanbase I've ever been a part of. The amount of fan creations, games, stories, animations, anything you can name really, is staggering. It's clear the community has an incredible passion for creation, and one of the most important things I feel I can do is help nurture that in my own way. It's why I've tried to give spotlights to projects I've genuinely enjoyed, like Delta Traveler or TS Underswap, both fan games I have incredibly high hopes for and got a lot out of. One project really stands out to me though. Back in Undertale's infancy, there were still a myriad of fan creations and games. I really got a kick out of Undertale Red, and hell, the developer for that game now works on Deltarune. But in 2016, I played the demo for a game I would be keeping my eye on for the next 7 years. Undertale Yellow, a fan-made prequel to Undertale starring the human that bears the yellow soul. I saw so much promise and potential in the demo, and I waited patiently for the full release, telling people about it when I could. Then, last December, the game finally released, to an incredible reception from the internet. Everyone, from the hardcore fanbase, casual fanbase, and even media and news outlets, loved this fan game. Well, almost everyone. For a fan game to achieve a level of praise and recognition to enter conversations with its official entries is no small accolade. I've played a lot of fan games, but the only one that I had seen reach this level was the utterly incredible AM2R, or another Metroid 2 remake. A fan remake so incredible that it, to this day, is not only included in fan conversations about the series, but routinely is included on people's top 5 lists for the Metroid series as a whole. Reaching that level is an incredible achievement, but along the way, I've noticed that actual nuanced conversation about Undertale Yellow has sort of faded. When a game reaches this level of popularity, it's not uncommon for it to receive devout haters, and recently within the fandom, it's been difficult to actually find genuine critical review of this game, instead devolving into conversations about the fandom's annoying tendencies, frivolous conversations, and pointless nitpicks about the game's canon and how it relates to Undertale, usually minute details not quite lining up. The point is, that discourse has, frankly, become exhausting, and I think this game deserves far, far better than that. So rather than engage endlessly in bad faith Twitter debates, I'm going to actually throw my hat into the ring. I've played Undertale for thousands of hours. I'd like to call myself quite a fan of it, and I think I have a pretty good grasp on the game, how it works, why it works so well, and what it does great and the flaws it also has. So today I'd like to put that to use and provide a full critical review of Undertale Yellow. The story, the gameplay, the everything. I want to leave no stone unturned. I want to voice my opinions, both good and bad, about this game, and I want to make sure that I'm taking it in good faith. I think a lot of discourse surrounding this game is honestly incredibly unfair, so I'm going to be the change that I want to see. Let's dive right into one of the most striking and impactful fan games I've ever played. So let's get into the story of Undertale Yellow. No, not that one! Undertale Yellow tells a hypothetical prequel to the events of Undertale. This time, you're put in control of Clover, the human that falls into the underground before Frisk. The events initially play out just like Undertale, with Clover meeting Toriel, but it quickly diverges into a different path as Clover is quickly separated from Toriel by a switch gone awry. And that's it, that's the end of Undertale Yellow, Clover's fucking dead. Clover pushes on through this new path and finds Flowey, returning from Undertale. However, rather than being antagonistic, Flowey actually instead offers assistance to Clover and helps them progress and save. Notably, Undertale Yellow's interpretation of events instead has Flowey in control of the save game system, so Clover has to save through him instead of being able to do it on their own. This doesn't really contradict anything from Undertale, so to say. And besides, this is simply the way this game wishes to present its story, and allows for some unique interactions Undertale itself didn't have later on, so I'm okay with this interpretation of the game's mechanics. More on this later. Clover progresses on through the dark ruins and meets Dolph, and just like Undertale, you can choose to befriend him and learn more about his character and have some fun interactions with him, or kill him. This game attempts to do a lot more with the neutral path than Undertale did. In Undertale, not only was it a prerequisite to the pacifist ending, it was more of an incomplete ending. This time, neutral actually has a bunch of content in the second half of the game that's unique to it, a different final boss, and a completely unique ending. From here, the game takes on a pretty similar structure to Undertale. Clover continues down this alternative path and meets pretty much exclusively brand new characters to Undertale Yellow. There's plenty of minor NPCs scattered about with pretty funny and endearing dialogue, and the major characters you'll meet along the way have a lot of depth and personality. Once Clover reaches Snowdin, they'll meet Martlet, a rookie sentry in the Royal Guard. She's a total doofus and falls into the lovable idiot archetype, not unlike Papyrus, but still stands very uniquely on her own. She has a very warm, endearing, caring side, and she's the most recurring character in the game. I find her to be an extremely enjoyable character, and I enjoyed almost every bit of dialogue and learning more about her. After Snowdin, Martlet, who you can't kill even in neutral due to her having the incredibly rare ability to actually stop a fight at low HP, shocking, I know, takes Clover through Waterfall on a raft. However, after falling into what I can only assume is an insane water park slide that Gaster built for shits and giggles in his free time, they become separated and Clover crosses through the dunes, a unique area to Undertale Yellow. As Clover progresses through this new area, there's a lot of fun fanfiction world building to learn about, like with this gemstone industry and the impacts on the underground's energy and climate, and you even get to play DDR with a luchador rooster. Clover eventually reaches the Wild East, a parody of old Wild West films both from a design standpoint and quite literally in the world itself. Just like how in Undertale, where Alphys loves anime that fell down from the human world, the Wild East is modeled after old cowboy movies instead from the same human VHS tapes. This is where you're introduced to two of the game's major characters, Starlo, the self-proclaimed sheriff of the town, alongside his group, the Feisty Five, as well as Soroba, a kitsune and friend of Starlo's. Starlo comes across as someone trying way too hard to be cool, and ends up being a very funny character while he goes from scenario to scenario pretending to be a big professional sheriff. Soroba, on the other hand, while entertaining Starlo's charades, clearly has something major weighing her down. We'll have a lot more to talk about in depth during the character section with these two. Making a parallel to Undertale's structure, the Wild East is divided up into three main gag segments, mirroring the three major gag segments in Hotland with Metaton. I do think this segment has some pacing problems, and it mainly stems from all three gag segments all taking place in roughly the same 4 rooms that make up the Wild East. You're suddenly railroaded here, and that can make the pace feel a bit sluggish through this segment. This is really the only time this happens, as I find this game's pace to be refreshingly quick in every other part of the game, so this part unfortunately stands out a bit to me. You have a fun battle with the Feisty Four before eventually going toe-to-toe with Starlo in a Wild West standoff. And once you defeat him, this is where the game's pacifist and neutral endings take a massive divergence. In Undertale, neutral was a prerequisite to the pacifist ending, where pacifist felt like an extra thing attached to the game if you did everything correctly. Undertale Yellow instead opts to make neutral more distinct, and this is the major diverging point. Since Yellow's neutral ending canonically takes place before the pacifist one, let's go over that first. Clover will enter the Steamworks, a giant mechanical area filled to the brim with Pepto-Bismol that connects directly to Hotland. However, upon restarting the power to the place with Flowey's help, Clover will find themselves being chased down by the rogue robot Axis. Axis is the creation of the late Chujin, a scientist who previously worked at the Steamworks. You can find out more about him as early as Snowdin if you've been investigating everything, as you'll find the heater in the Honeydew Inn was made by him and Martlet together. Flowey also becomes substantially more direct in his assistance during this segment of the game, since it's really only Clover and Axis, and this provides a lot of opportunity to see him in a more supportive role, more casually masking his snarky attitude from Undertale, with Stum still coming through, of course. After exploring the Steamworks, fighting through the various robots that inhabit the place, including the Guardians of the Greenhouse area, and even recreating the events of Breaking Bad and potentially violating the Geneva Conventions, Clover eventually faces off with Axis, either destroying him or letting Axis live for himself with the freedom to be flawed as he is. An interesting detail is that no robots in the Steamworks give LV when killed, as they're not sentient beings, but Axis will if he is killed, suggesting he really does have true sentience and constitutes as a living being. Eventually, Clover makes it back to Undertale territory, entering Hotland right of the UG Apartments, the area that will eventually become the MTT Resort by the time of Undertale's events. Before heading to Asgore, Clover makes a stop by the rooftop where they run into Martlet. Martlet, regardless of if you're almost completely pacifist or have killed quite a few monsters, resolves to essentially adopt Clover and take care of them, and the two go live happily ever after, and it's a very sweet and happy ending with absolutely nothing wrong. Surprise! Flowey instead disposes of Martlet and attempts to absorb Clover's soul out of frustration for them not going to Asgore and doing what he wanted, bringing Clover inside Flowey's mind. Flowey explains that the entire premise of Undertale Yellow was his doing. He had tried to use Clover to defeat Asgore for him so he could get the human souls and accomplish his plan, but Clover ended up staying with Toriel every single time. Even when Flowey intervened to make Clover leave, Clover had a chronic skill issue and kept dying long before reaching Asgore's castle. To avoid this inevitability, Flowey set the trap that put Clover on the alternate path that we played through in Yellow's story, and personally guided Clover through it, allowing them to use his save and load powers to assist in the journey. Alright, let's talk about lore stuff now. Undertale's a bit open-ended with the timeline of events, and Undertale Yellow's story was concepted as far as back as 2016. In Undertale Yellow's interpretation of events, Flowey's creation happened sometime after the 5th soul was collected, and Flowey has more determination than Clover, so he is still granted control over the save system. Undertale doesn't give any specific time frame on the order of these particular events, though the usual implication is that Flowey was created after all the other humans fell, though that is not necessarily definitively canon, and there is a lot of wiggle room here. This has caused quite a few discussions, but please keep in mind Undertale Yellow is a fan game, and this is simply the interpretation of events that it has chosen to represent. This is by no means definitively canon to Undertale, and it shouldn't be treated as such, nor should the game receive constant scrutiny for being based off of an interpretation of the lore like virtually all fan stories are. This discussion has been annoyingly commonplace in the fanbase, and honestly, it's stupid and demeaning and really should stop. Undertale Yellow is not canon, it is a fan game. But the interpretation of Undertale in which Yellow's story is constructed is not a knock against the game's writing or a signifier of lower quality like some may say, nor does the game have to be definitively canon to tell a good story. We good? Cool. We then go into one of the coolest set pieces in the entire game, a battle against Flowey inside of his own mind. The game's art direction goes absolutely off the wall here, diving headfirst into full-on psychological horror. You'll be even greeted by mangled, deformed versions of all the major monsters you may or may not have killed, adding extra attacks to the fight and really doing something special with the concept of a neutral route exclusive final boss. The phases are separated by running segments through various areas, the battle box is completely warped, and the attack design is extremely nonsensical. Eventually, you manage to seemingly escape from Flowey, getting a glimpse into his psyche for the moment. A gigantic mass of Flowey corpses, reflecting the sheer amount of resets Flowey underwent in this interpretation of events, and how far it has pushed him. After getting jump scared by a fake Martlet straight at a Doki Doki Literature Club, you come face to face with Flowey again, sporting an absolutely insane design where the true final fight begins. This fight is a really creative spin on the Omega Flowey fight from Undertale, with the different mini-phases being represented with completely different art styles from various other games, even with out-of-place 3D models and wild attacks. Eventually, you duel Flowey to a standstill, with him realizing that this fight will never end and instead opting to reset. This was a really creative way to handle a neutral ending, as it eliminates them having to account for it also somehow tying into Undertale, so they can focus on the Pacifist ending, which is intended to tie in. So let's rewind and talk about Pacifist now. If you're still Love 1 and haven't killed anything after defeating Starlo, the Steamworks changes quite a bit. You'll instead be accompanied by Soroba the entire way through instead, giving you plenty of time to get to know her and what she's about. As it turns out, Chujin was Soroba's husband, and as such she has a very significant attachment to Axis, as he's really the last remaining piece of his work and an indicator that it was actually a success. Soroba also reveals her motivation, to rescue her daughter Kaneko, who is currently in Dr. Alphys' lab after tragically having fallen down. Of course, people who played Undertale immediately knows what this implies. She's become an amalgamate. The Steamworks plays out differently with Soroba in tow, with a diverging path focusing on some minigames that require 2 people to complete, and some really humorous moments with Axis, like where you have to make him a robot girlfriend. You'll also find out along the way that Soroba has a strong dislike of Asgore for both his inaction as well that he personally rejected Chujin's work. After pacifying Axis, or opting to kill him at the very last moment and get the neutral ending instead, yeah, you can do that. Soroba gets really mad at you and then you just leave, It's very sad. You make it to the Hotland elevator, but right before leaving, you're stopped by Starlo, who reveals Soroba has ulterior motives and planned to put Clover in harm's way. Soroba escapes with Starlo in pursuit, and Clover goes back with Martlet to investigate the Ketsukane Manor to see what Soroba might really be up to. Did I mention their surname is Ketsukane? I don't think I did. Well, now I did. You eventually discover a secret basement that reveals Chujin was attempting to devise a serum derived from the human soul that could greatly accelerate the process of shattering the barrier by enhancing a monster injected with it. However, in order for it to work, Soroba believes that the human soul needs to be completely pure. This is why she only joins you in Pacifist. If you've killed anyone, Clover's soul would be unpure and unfit to be used for the serum. If you investigate Chujin's grave, you can find a hidden videotape that even shows the Blue Integrity Soul actually attacked a monster Kaneko was with, which is confirmed through some fun value shenanigans to actually have been Dolv, which is who he mistook you for back at the beginning of the game. Additionally, it reveals that the Blue Integrity Soul human was unexpectedly killed by Axis, giving Chujin temporary possession of the soul, which is how he performed his experiments. This actually is an elaboration and interpretation on some unused text from Undertale, detailing the final words of the Integrity human before they died in Waterfall by unknown causes. Armed with this information, Clover and Martlet head to New Home to confront Soroba, ending with the Pacifist route's final fight. It's a multi-phase battle featuring some over-the-top attacks and killer music and visuals, but during the phase transitions, Clover gets to see some flashbacks showing what happened to Soroba. Kaneko, wanting to help her late father, actually volunteers to be the original candidate for the serum injection, and having seemingly perfected it, Soroba goes ahead and injects her with it after she asks for it, only to immediately cause her to fall down. After defeating Soroba, Clover can choose to spare her or kill her, either one leading into Undertale's events. If you choose to kill Soroba, Clover and Martlet head to Asgore, and an unwinnable battle occurs where Clover's soul is taken. If you choose to spare Soroba, Clover willingly gives up their soul to hopefully eventually free monster kind and give them true justice, and passes away with the credits rolling and Flowey accepting the outcome and waiting to see what happens next. I really enjoyed this ending. It hits an amazing amount of emotional beats towards the end and really strongly makes me connect with and enjoy the original cast of characters this game provides. It really feels like Undertale Yellow was able to tell the more original story that it wanted to tell and didn't retread on Undertale nearly as much as I would have expected. You can tell that a great deal of love and care and attention was poured into every character here, from their motivations to their personalities and strong emotional moments, especially towards the very end. The flawed Pacifist ending, while still leading into Undertale smoothly, intentionally feels empty and sad, with Starlo completely torn apart by Soroba's death and Martlet's grim acceptance of the inevitability of the conflict between Asgore and Clover. But, of course, this is an Undertale fan game, so we have one more ending to discuss. Undertale Yellow has the obligatory genocide route, and just like Undertale, it's very light on plot and focuses more on the isolation and atmosphere. And in this regard, it really succeeds. The Wild East and UG apartments feel incomprehensibly silent when you reach them. The desert oasis town is completely barren, with not a single soul in sight to talk to. Since Undertale's genocide route also largely focused on the meta-narrative aspects of such a feat, Undertale Yellow instead goes for a different approach and presents the route as a fucked up version of what the soul trait of justice really entails. Oh hey, I have a whole video on this. That's funny. However, playing this route turns Clover into a soulless death machine. They lose any and all bit of personality they have in other routes, and the game plays around with making you feel passively guilty for completely dehumanizing them and ripping away all emotions. It's not as direct as Undertale's moral lessons, but considering you've probably played that game already, I appreciate the different direction. The ending also affords the chance to be pretty difficult, as you've definitely played Undertale if you're playing this game, and additionally, it gets to take advantage of being the final route you'll play, as just like in Undertale, this route's existence is not clear unless you go out of your way to initiate it, so it doesn't have to spend much time teaching mechanics. A few fights in the game are actually altered in Geno, with Martlet's attacks becoming faster and more difficult, but just like in Neutral, she will still escape at low HP. Undertale Yellow, of course, also has the Genocide exclusive bosses, with the mirror for Undyne the Undying being the fight against Soroba after quickly dispatching Starlo. This is a super tense and pretty difficult fight, featuring pretty wild attack patterns and an exclusive mechanic that deals damage to your maximum HP, causing your health pool to shrink so you can't just spam items to get out of it. This fight's design feels like a death by 1,000 cut style. With the way the game's stats work, you're able to get hit a lot. It takes Soroba almost 20 or more hits to actually put you down, as opposed to Undyne, who does it in about 5. As a result, the game gets away with having some pretty daunting bullet patterns, knowing that complete mastery is not actually required to beat the fight. Of course, the fight is still completely and consistently able to be no-hit by skilled and experienced players. It's just a neat way of making the fight feel more overwhelming than it actually really is. There's also a Genocide exclusive version of the Axis fight, flipping the entire thing on its head and having Axis on the defensive. It's not a super difficult fight in comparison to Soroba, but it is nice to see more than 2 exclusive fights in this route. After Axis accidentally lets slip that he killed a human in the past, Clover completely loses it and gains an immense laser attack that cleaves completely through him, with Flowey left stunned. However, they saved the best for last. Martlet managed to escape earlier, but this time, she comes prepared with a determination serum she got from Alphys' lab, and with it, she ascends into Zenith Martlet, the true final boss of the Genocide route. This fight is absolutely unbelievable, with some incredibly fast and frantic patterns that make use of the exclusive dash move. I didn't mention it, but the other final bosses also have this move. It gives you complete invincibility, and this fight expects you to use that to its fullest. Crafting a fair but extremely difficult bullet hell boss is a very daunting task, but I feel as though Zenith Martlet manages to do that pretty well. I've played this fight a lot now, and there's only 2 attacks in the whole fight I feel are not completely consistent, which is honestly very impressive considering how overwhelming a lot of these attacks appear to be when you see them for the first time. But you'll quickly find almost all of them can be learned and dodged with only a few tries needed to get it down. Again, you have a dash that literally gives you frame 1 invincibility like a fox shine. It helps a lot, make sure to use it. The fight importantly just feels extremely climactic and like a huge spectacle. Items and equipment really help, as the first half of this fight cannot be hurt traditionally and requires you to use the Yellow's Soul Laser attack instead. The Zenith fight will take you many tries, but to be honest, after playing both of them many times, I still think it's easier than Sans. A lot of people haven't played Undertale in a while now, and maybe forget just how difficult Sans really was the first time you fought him. At worst, I'd say this fight is on par difficulty-wise, which feels like a pretty good place to land in my opinion. Honestly, this feels like a good time to segue into a common topic regarding this game: the difficulty. On the whole, I think this game is more difficult than Undertale, which makes sense. It is made for and intended to be played after Undertale, and you would be pretty well familiar with the mechanics at that point. A common complaint was lobbied at the game when it first released that there was a lot of unfair attacks, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news for those people, but there are very few objectively unfair attacks in this game. In fact, significantly less than Undertale even. While more demanding on the regular, the game overall still very, very rarely places you in situations in which you cannot feasibly dodge the patterns that you're asked to. Like I said, I actually do not find Zenith or any fight in this game to be as difficult as Sans was. That's not to say it's easy, far from it. It is difficult, but considering the type of stuff Undertale expected from its players on the hardest route, I think it's a pretty appropriate challenge. Sans can wipe out a huge chunk of your HP in just one mistake. In order to beat him, you need to be familiar with every attack, and it will take the average player dozens and dozens of tries. I think a lot of people have forgotten just how difficult that initial experience is, but it's like riding a bike. Once you learn how to do it, you never really forget. And when I played Yellow, Zenith took me a little under an hour to defeat, and this was in the launch patch that didn't have the heal act or easy mode. I know some will say, oh, but I'm the big Undertale speedrunner, of course I'd beat it. My opinion shouldn't matter in that regard. But this argument falls apart because, guys, I'm not all that great at bullet hell games, to be honest. I happen to be extremely good at Undertale specifically because I've played it a million times and know exactly what to do, when to do it, the ins and outs of every single attack. But when playing something completely blind, I'm not really much better than simply an above-average gamer would be. I have difficulty sight-reading attacks, and I need practice to be able to learn things. It's how I got to where I am to begin with. All this to say, I never once found Yellow's difficulty overwhelming and unfair from a casual perspective, and as I sat down and learned it in depth for various speedruns I did of the game, I was able to objectively fact-check that feeling. I do not believe the claims that the game was poorly tested or poorly balanced hold much water at all, and there's also a gigantic elephant in the room. Undertale Yellow now has an easy mode that you can enable that does nothing but simply make you take less damage. It can potentially take some of the overwhelming edge off the fights if you need that kind of help. There isn't any downside or penalty for using it. However, one issue that arises here that I actually do have with Yellow as a whole is that it does not do a good job of explaining how monumentally important the defense stat is in this game.
Armor? We don't need armor. Armor's for bitches.
In Undertale, 5 defense points meant you took 1 less damage, with some HP and scaling for higher levels. In Undertale Yellow, 1 defense point means 1 less damage, with no scaling at all. This makes the stat incredibly important, and I'd wager to guess the vast majority of people saying the game is unfair simply are unaware of that and did not seek out better armor or do not know easy mode exists. In fact, all that easy mode does is simply adds 2 defense to Clover's stats. Considering everything else works almost exactly like Undertale, and how heavily this game leans into Undertale for references on the systems, and how it often doesn't need to give tutorials to explain the mechanics that are identical to that game, I find this to actually be a genuine issue with the game that I'd like to see addressed at some point. The Wild Revolver, a pretty stark mechanical change from the base gameplay, gets an entire segment dedicated to teaching you how to use it on the neutral and pacifist route. I can excuse Geno not having this tutorial, as again, it's something you'd have to go out of your way to do and logically will be played second. Just a little note somewhere about how defense works and how important it is would probably save a lot of grief, especially on the tougher bosses. Think about it this way. A 1-point defense increase from equipping the buckle item over the safety jacket item when facing the Genocide Soroba fight is an entire less point of damage taken. I describe that fight as a death by 1,000 cuts. But just 1 extra damage per hit makes you tank a noticeably lesser amount of hits. So yeah, I think this game is actually very well balanced, and the attacks, with only just a tiny amount of exceptions, are pretty completely fair and well constructed, even better than Undertale overall, I'd say. But in order to properly experience this, one needs to magically know that the defense stat works differently from Undertale, where armor basically barely mattered at all. Seriously, the 2-2 armor makes Undyne the Undying deal a whole 2 less damage per hit. You're still dying in 5 hits. Okay, now back to talking about the Zenith fight. The second phase of the fight lets you use the fight button, and it really feels like a hectic climax, with some of the spectacle being reined in favor of a more focused duel as Martlet's determination begins to wear off and fade. Splitting the fight in 2 also gives a much needed checkpoint, as again, this is still a very difficult fight and having one here really helps. After finally defeating Martlet, she melts into nothingness and Clover is elevated to LV20, with Flowey showing up to chastise them about how this fight will have alerted Asgore and how they won't be able to progress anymore. Flowey attempts to reset, but quickly finds that Clover now has him outmatched in determination, preventing Flowey from loading his save. In fact, Clover uses the save system to trap Flowey, preventing him from leaving or attacking, causing him to finally snap and completely lose it before Clover blasts him away into nothingness. In an extremely chilling, quiet, and uncomfortable moment, Clover walks through the deserted new home and reaches Asgore, effortlessly defeating him and taking the souls out of the underground, ending Undertale Yellow. I appreciate that the Yellow team wasn't afraid to have one ending be completely detached from Undertale, as this series of events obviously makes that game's events impossible. The neutral and pacifist endings both exist within Undertale's confines, but just like how this route completely lets you break Clover as a character, it also lets you break the very concept of what is possible just to get your ending that you wanted. I will say though that the characterization of this route isn't as striking as it is in Undertale. None of the meta-narrative aspects are present here beyond what I mentioned, which is something that fans have had long roundtable discussions on throughout the years. I think that this route is fine for what it is, but beyond Clover's character, there isn't really much deeper meaning to be found here, and I could see that maybe being a bit of a letdown for some. I think the fun and difficult bosses make up for it, of course. It's not like it isn't enjoyable, it just doesn't have that immense depth of Undertale's Geno route. But in fairness, very few other things do. Though I do appreciate that the game keeps you moving. In this game, encounters happen much faster and each room is stocked with only a handful of monsters. So you actually have to use multiple rooms and the quicker encounters keep the pace up. I appreciate this decision, as the whole long grind aspect of Undertale's Genocide route doesn't really truly work as well the second time. And as you have definitely played Undertale if you're playing this, the game respects your time in that regard. And that's all of the endings of the game covered. I find all 3 endings are worth doing playthroughs for, as they actually all feel pretty distinct in their themes, characterization, and gameplay. Neutral is worth it for the final Flowey fight alone, which I feel like is the biggest single highlight of the entire game. Which is majorly impressive considering it's flanked by both the excellent Soroba fight and the wickedly cool Zenith Martlet fight. Another huge factor in this game, just like Undertale, is the strength of the core cast of the characters. Martlet, Starlo, and Soroba are all really impressively written characters with a lot of depth beyond what just they appear to be. Martlet is goofy and aloof, but just like Papyrus, has a lot of depth and charm and is genuinely fun to interact with and hear from. She's kind, compassionate, but also not stupid by any means, and is actually pretty emotionally adept despite her also seeing the good in people at all times. Of course, she is also incredibly strong, which you're put on the back end of during the Zenith battle. She has a lot of depth and relationships with pretty much everyone in the game, and regardless of the route you play, you'll be finding out new things about her. Starlo is really compelling. He of course has a ton of great funny moments, but you'll find out he's actually a really genuine person who truly cares for his friends and the people around him, and just wants what's best for them. He really cares about Soroba too, though he also has a pretty clear crush on her, and that's an interesting dynamic to explore between them, as Soroba is still processing Chujin passing away and is in an awkward spot with that kind of thing. I enjoy basically every time Starlo is on the screen in this game. He has some of the best lines in the game, and really shines brightly as an interesting and dynamic character. Soroba is pretty much the main focus of the game's pacifist ending, and as such, had to have a lot of backstory and depth. She's a very strong character in both ability and personality, and offers a lot of depth during the Steamworks climb. Her backstory is extremely tragic, with her being essentially directly responsible for the death of her own daughter, and seeing how she deals with the guilt that causes and coming to finally accept it and move on from it instead of just drinking and isolating is quite strong. She's a character with a lot of pain, and I think her storyline proves to be an interesting and emotionally complex enough to hinge the entire ending on, which is essentially the role Asriel filled in Undertale's story. The background characters are all, of course, pretty memorable, just like Undertale's background characters, with a lot of silly lines and good dynamics between them. Undertale Yellow does a great job keeping the world feel connected through these relationships, like for example how the mining operators are parents of one of the Feisty Five, Moray, or how Dolv has the connection with Kaneko, or how Martlet and Chujin work together on various things in Snowdin. The list goes on. It really does make this feel like a connected, breathing world, and not just some areas detached from each other. If there's one character I thought was fumbled a little bit though, it's Dolv. He basically gets no involvement after you leave the Dark Ruins, and he's pretty much sidelined in favor of the other 3. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I do wish they would have done a little bit more with him as a character, but what's there is nice. Of course, if you don't enjoy these characters, the game probably won't be as enjoyable for you. Just like Undertale, the structure and setup of this game really requires the characters to be standout, and I've met many people who didn't connect with Undertale as strongly for that reason. But I feel like if you enjoyed Undertale, you'll probably enjoy this cast too. And on that note, the soundtrack. There's a lot to talk about here, so let's unpack the music of Undertale Yellow. This whole soundtrack is fucking incredible. I mean, wow. I really enjoyed what I heard in the game's demo, but wow, there's so many amazingly standout tracks in this game. Just like Undertale, there's a lot of leitmotifs associated with the various characters, but the game never ever feels limited or constrained by trying to incorporate that musical concept. It just flows incredibly well together, and there's so many solid pieces all throughout. Anything that is more so a remix of the Undertale tunes is of course great, but the original stuff is all excellent. The environmental themes all do a wonderful job of immediately establishing atmosphere while providing some pretty catchy melodies, and the battle themes, oh god, the battle themes. It starts as soon as Dolv's theme, Forlorn, but all of the battle themes are remarkably well constructed, with strong highlights like Showdown and Protocol. And then, of course, things ramp up further in intensity with the big battle themes, like Guns Blazing. But the real standouts, in my opinion, are the final battle themes. Flowey's themes are super dynamic to fit the setting, but still have some great gripping thematic melodies at play, incorporating his theme from Undertale in a very new direction. The final battle theme for the Pacifist ending, A Mother's Love, is an absolutely incredible multi-phase track with an absolutely outstanding drop into a fusion of the main Undertale motif and the main Undertale Yellow motif, which is present all over the soundtrack, most purely in the game over theme Justice. In the flawed Pacifist ending, you get a tragic rendition of Asgore's theme, Burgundtruckung? Burger trucking, taking on a much more somber tone to reflect the tragic nature of the unwinnable encounter. The genocide route, of course, brings the heat with the amazing Trial by Fury and End of the Line. You also get the incredible retribution as the Zenith fight concludes, with a very driving force behind it as it feels like it's really encouraging you to press onwards just a little bit further. All of the Genocide tracks actually do something unique and share a motif from the exclusive regular enemy theme, Enemy Retreating. This piece is an unexpected bop when it first kicks in, but it starts to slow and distort as you exhaust the kill counter for the area in a really menacing and empty way. All of the Geno boss themes incorporate this tune in some way, some more pronounced than others, except for two of Martlet's. Protocol gets a sick rock cover with Apprehension from Martlet's first battle. I mean, seriously, listen to this guitar solo. Of course, I've been saving my favorite battle track for last, the absolutely incredible tune that accompanies the battle with Zenith Martlet, Remedy. This track had me absolutely floored in the same kind of way Megalovania did the first time I heard it. It's catchy, it's intense, and it's absolutely rockin' the whole way through. I'd die to this boss 10 more times if it meant I got to keep hearing this banger. It takes Martlet's motif and just goes absolutely nuts with it, with a Mega Man X guitar synth of all things. The soundtrack as a whole, from the quieter tracks to the moody ones to the upbeat to the intense, demonstrates a near mastery of understanding how music can elevate an experience and enhance character, atmosphere, you name it. It feels very fitting for the shining part of an Undertale fan game to be the music, when the shining part of Undertale is also the music. Of course, this is still a video game, but in terms of gameplay, this is where the game is the most faithful to Undertale. If you enjoyed Undertale's battle system, I've got great news for you. It's the same exact thing here. The game, of course, introduces new mechanics like the dash and Soroba's red attacks, but largely it plays very similarly to Undertale. Since I think Undertale's combat system was super inventive and fun, I have no extra notes to add here. This system is just as fun too. The game attempts to add some spice to the combat system halfway through by introducing the wild revolver and changing how the reticle works, but this is pretty akin to the multi-hit weapons from Undertale and doesn't really change fundamentals much. Really, the only notable difference in the gameplay is a run button, which is extremely appreciated and keeps the game's pace very fast, except for the parts where it isn't. Yellow also has an acceptable amount of secrets and items to acquire that encourage exploration, notably the golden items, which if you look around hard enough are powerful items with neat effects, but if you gather all of them, you get to fight a secret boss. Me! That's right, they put me in the game. 10 out of 10, no notes. I also appreciate that the game has secrets and even has the fun value just like Undertale, but has the restraints to make the events all unique things to Yellow. The only Undertale character to appear in these events is Gerson. They're fun secrets to check out and don't at all feel like they're just here to fulfill a Gaster quota like one might expect from an Undertale fan work. And that is Undertale Yellow. The best way I can summarize how I feel about this game is that even if it wasn't a fan game and was a game I had to buy for money with the expectations that come from that, I still feel as though this is an extremely enjoyable experience for anyone who has played Undertale. Of course, it's not a paid game, it's a completely free labor of love, and this game deserves the praise for what it is. It's rare to see fan games slip into conversations with the original work they're based on, but it's clear just by looking around that this game has had a profound impact on many people, just like Undertale did, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. I highly recommend this game, and despite playing it several times this year, it hasn't worn on me. If anything, I enjoy it even more now than I did when I first played it. It's easy to think that perhaps it was just being caught up in the hype, but no, Undertale Yellow is a genuinely fantastic game that deserves the recognition it has received. The development team of this game should be extremely proud of what they managed to create. While it is not perfect by any means, neither was Undertale. Neither is anything. Undertale Yellow is a fantastic game born of passion and love, and is one of the best fan games I've ever played, and a really fun time in general. It gets an incredibly high recommendation from me if you have not played it yourself yet. And even if you have, give it another run through. It's a short game and you might appreciate it more on the second playthrough than you did at first. Thank you everybody for watching and sticking through this thing. I've always wanted to make a video in this style, and one day, I hope to make a full review for Undertale properly, which might be like 3 times the length of this video. I have a lot to say on it. Anyway, I hope you all have a fantastic night. Thank you for watching, and take care.